you. Today's topic on CCN Live is, what is an Education 504 plan and how can it help your cancer fighter? So we're going to start big picture, and thankfully we have Dr. Kerr joining us today. Hi, Dr. Kerr. Co-founder and CEO at Lotus Training and Consulting Group. And then you probably all know Patty Luttrell's hiding over in the corner over there, is kind of moderating the entire thing. So I want to start from the position that even if you've been going through this cancer journey, maybe you've already finished. Maybe you are in remission with your cancer fighter. And you don't know what a 504 is, a Section 504. Maybe you're not even aware of it. We should probably start high level. And Dr. Kerr, can you help explain to us a little bit, to the layman out there, or the person who might not be aware, exactly what it is?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Bruce and Patty and the team at CCN. The Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a tool that we can use inside of education, so for school, to help support our cancer survivors, no matter where they are in their journey, whether they're in treatment or years past remission and are now just starting to potentially see some late effects. It is a federal law that prohibits discrimination for anybody who is identified and eligible, and it applies to every public school. So public districts, public charters, and magnet schools. Essentially, any school that takes federal financial aid has to comply with the Section 504 plan for students.
Got it. I'm gonna ask you a question, and I know, especially in the state of Arizona, we have kind of a myriad. You touched on some of them, but private schools are not required by law to follow this. Do some of them work with you anyway? Is that a nice way to put it?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So a student who has a 504 plan, or it's an IEP, which we're not going to touch on today, is eligible to apply for an education savings account, which gives them access to private schools. And certainly a student who's just attending a private school might ask for a 504 plan. Lots of schools will accommodate because they obviously have the best interest in mind of the child, but they're not required to. So that's really the only difference. So if you're enrolled in a private school and you go through and ask for this process to start, it's sort of up to the goodness of their policies if they're interested in having that relationship with you. That doesn't mean you can't ask, but unlike a public school, a district or a charter school or a magnet school who is federally required to do so, you don't get that same provision in a private school.
And so the 504 plan, applying specifically to, again, our cancer fighters, who in that sense, that we understand it, who qualifies for it? What is the criteria you must reach to qualify for a 504?
Yep. It's actually a two-part test, if you will. The first part is that a student has to have an either physical or mental impairment, and that could either be temporary or persistent. And then in addition to that, that impairment has to impact what's called a major life function. And a major life function really can be anything. It can be listening, speaking, breathing, moving, and then certainly in the case of school, it could be learning. So if you have, as a result of cancer treatment, whether it's a physical change or a mental or emotional or psychological change, and that's impacting how you really get along in the world, then you're eligible for a 504 plan. And essentially the 504 plan is designed specifically to level the playing field. It's a tool to make it so that your cancer survivor, no matter what they've been through in treatment, can have the same kind of fair educational outcome as a student who is not impacted by cancer.
And I just want to be clear, as I try to understand more about this as well. A child, a school age, a child of school age, they can be going through treatment, or this even applies if they're post-treatment, correct?
Absolutely. So sometimes when they're in treatment, if they're not school age at the time of treatment, a parent doesn't need to be worrying about doing a 504 plan. but oftentimes our cancer survivors have late effects that can be anywhere from, just a few months after they're out of treatment to many years later. And so even if your child has previously been going to school and hasn't had any issues whatsoever, if a new effect emerges, it's absolutely available to you at whatever point you feel like there's an impairment due to those late effects, and that is impacting one of those major life functions.
So it's not like there's a clock ticking, like you can only do it during this narrow window. You're saying on the what the parents or caregivers notice, they can start having this discussion whenever they notice their child's having an issue in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes it's even the school that first notices it and they initiate the conversation. Certainly a parent can initiate it themselves if they are noticing something, but oftentimes it'll be the school or the classroom teacher that recognizes that something just doesn't seem quite the same. And so it doesn't matter whether it's the school that reaches out to the parent or caregiver, or whether it's the family that reaches out to the school.
So Dr. Kerr, I'm going to have to imagine here, because thankfully I haven't had to walk through this journey, that a child going back to school, maybe during or after treatment, trying to get back to some sense of normalcy, which is probably very important, obviously, for the family and for the child themselves. Let's get back to being typical in that sense. There's a bit of a stigma that might come along with saying, I need some special help like this. How would you address some of the parents that might be a little uneasy, if you will, at then labeling their child again?
Yeah, and that's a great point. The goal of the whole 504 process is to, again, level the playing field so that they don't look like a child that's any different than their peers. It is a little scary to say, if you look at the criteria and it says you have to be disabled, that comes with a lot of, stereotypes and concerns.
That word is scary, disabled, right?
That word is scary. But the reality is that some of our cancer survivors are either physically disabled due to surgery, amputations, whatever the case might be, or emotionally or psychologically impaired or cognitively impaired as a result of their treatment. And if as caregivers, we can realize that this is not about putting on another label, but rather making it so that they can function just like other typical kids that can in school. I think that's the value of thinking through this process.
So the fact that we have so many that have joined us for this and other calls where we've talked about this leads me to believe that there are people out there, a lot of parents or caregivers that might say, okay, I think this falls into our wheelhouse. So what's next? Let's start again from kind of a blank slate, Dr. Kerr. I've acknowledged that my child is struggling for the reasons we've talked about. It's related specifically to their cancer journey in the sense of we need to address that, acknowledge it, and how can we streamline or smooth out the educational process, which can already be a bit of a crazy time right now anyway. I think it would be an understatement of biblical proportions. What should they do first? What's the first step that you take?
Well, and I know Patty at the end will show a link to the materials and resources that we put together for families, but I've written a complete guide that has all of the information that walks through the steps that I'm about to explain. And there's an accompanying short how-to video that goes along with it. And again, Patty will show the link to how to access that at the end of the call. But essentially, just like you said, Bruce, once a parent says, yep, I think my child is impacted either physically, emotionally, or mentally due to their treatment, and it's now impacting the way they function in life, specifically maybe to school or something else, they have to reach out to the school if the school hasn't already reached out to them. And I always encourage parents to do it in writing. So the guide actually has a sample template letter that the folks over at Phoenix Children's Hospital were kind enough to share with us that essentially just lays it out. And essentially you're requesting for your child to be evaluated to determine whether or not they meet the criteria. And then once that process begins, schools are required to, again, public schools are required to adhere to this process to complete the evaluation and the meeting to determine any next steps within approximately 60 days. Our experience is that, especially if this child is currently actively in treatment, that goes pretty quickly because, again, everyone wants the best thing for the student and the child. But sometimes it does take a little while longer if you're not in treatment to collect any evidence that you might need. But that first initiation is a letter in writing to the school administrator asking for them to evaluate whether or not your child meets the criteria.
Dr. Kerr, in your experience, I guess I should say, is this adversarial with the schools, or are the schools receptive to this? Or, like you said, if someone's going through treatment, I think it's obvious, and the last thing a teacher or an administrator is going to say is no. But is it the process itself? Like, I'm thinking about some of the parents who are saying, okay, I'm ready to start down this path. What should they expect? Should they expect open arms? Should they expect a little, we're not sure? Like, how does that process look from a caregiver, parent, and I'll use the term school administrator side?
Well, it certainly doesn't have to be adversarial. And the goal of the guide was to help parents understand how to navigate the process. So we go through, what do you do to prepare for your 504 meeting, to what does it look like the day that you show up? It can be intimidating, though, to be honest. And even as an educator, when I go to my child's 504 annual review, it's still a little nerve-wracking, if you will, to be the only parent.
Sure.
And I always encourage you to bring somebody with you, so you're not going by yourself, but you're in a room full of lots of other administrators, the teachers that your child interacts with, if your school has a nurse, a counselor, maybe even a school psychologist. So it can feel really intimidating if you don't know what you're walking into. But if you come in with the goal of collaborating and finding solutions to help meet your child's needs, know that that's also the place that the school personnel is coming into. Then it should be pretty easy to get through the process, find the right fit in terms of the accommodations, and put a plan together.
So something you mentioned earlier, I think that's important, is that you can start this process at any time. At any time you acknowledge or realize I might have a specific issue with my child. So it doesn't matter if it's the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year. But what about, and I'll use the term grades, is this available, I'll say K through 12? Like, are there cutoffs? Are there limitations?
It is available, actually pre-K through 12, again, if that is a preschool that's attached to a public school that receives federal funds. And it's actually the transition plan out of high school into college. So if your child has a 504 plan in high school, even if they just started it in high school, it will be what they use to potentially get extra time on college admissions tests. It will go with them to college and university. Every college and university has an Office of Disability Services or some similar named office that helps to provide accommodations for them. And it's also the plan that transitions young adults into the workforce. So the 504 plan leads to the Disabilities Act. For ADA compliance. So if they need any kind of accommodations in the workplace and they have a 504 plan, that is something that they can use into adulthood.
Dr. Kerr, I'm going to try to say this without laughing out loud. School looks a little different this year than it has in the past. Mm-hmm. I can't even imagine. And my guess is anybody that's watching, if they're in different school districts or different schools, it may look different in every single one of those. Does a 504 plan work? Does it come into play if you are, for example, distance learning and you're at home? Mom and dad are the teacher, as we've heard, and the child is doing their work via computer or attending school very infrequently. Does that affect this at all, and how?
Absolutely. It applies no matter what the setting is. So even students who are full-time online in school, like that's the educational opportunity that their families want for them, those public schools still have to implement the 504 plan. But in this transition where families might be hybrid, sometimes in school, sometimes not, or online, there are actually in the guide specific accommodations for distance learning that we've put together, because it does look different in terms of managing time and being able to stay organized or needing extra support for checking in. So our goal with putting together the guide and providing different sets of accommodations was to help parents determine, and there's actually a workbook, kind of a worksheet that parents can go through with their child if it's age appropriate, to say, given what issues, we're facing with, school, which of these accommodations would be best? A lot of them apply no matter what the setting is, but there are some very specific ones to distance learning that are important for families to consider. Whether they're renewing a 504, they already have one, and now they want to add those distance learning because they're going to be online this year, and even if it's temporary, or if they're starting one from scratch, they can put together all of the different accommodations that they think meets their child's needs.
You just mentioned something, Dr. Kerr, that I want to touch on because I don't know if it's been clear. This plan, we'll start from the beginning. We sit down, we're across the table from administrators, teachers, we come up with a plan, we all agree on it. Am I handcuffed to this plan? Does the plan change? How does the plan change? Is it in perpetuity? Does it have an expiration date? What should a parent or caregiver expect from that standpoint regarding the plan?
That's a great question. So your 504 plan should be renewed and reviewed annually. So and it's usually at the start of the next academic year. And during that meeting, which looks just like the meeting you had initially, you're going over any new information or data about your child, if there's any changes that have happened since last year. The team, which includes the parent, and also the child if you invite them to the process, go over the accommodations that they've been using, determine whether they still work, if they're still necessary, if they need to add anything new to the plan, you can do that at that time. So you're never handcuffed, but it's important to remember that the 504 plan can only be changed when the entire team comes back together. So the school can't just change it or stop doing it without the parent being part of that process. I would also say, go ahead. I would say that if for some reason during the year something happens that requires a change, you can always ask for another meeting. So you don't have to wait another year or an annual review to make changes. If the treatment changes to your child's protocol, or they have new side effects, or a new late effect happens that's really needs to be addressed, that isn't already taken care of in the plan that you have, you can always, again, send an email, write that letter saying, hey, I'd like to call or reconvene our 504 team because we've got some new things that we need to tackle.
New information. I'm trying to now switch gears a little and put myself in the place of the school. Is it customary, usual, expected that a teacher or administrator may come to you in that meeting and say, here's some things we've noticed that maybe you're not even aware of. Here's some things we think would help. Or they're engaged participants, at least I would hope, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the 504 meeting, when you all get together after the evaluation has been done, the parents get to come and bring their information, diagnosis information from their provider, as well as anything else, and kind of share what their worries are. But teachers also get a chance to go around the room and share your child's strengths and areas that they might be struggling with. And so it really is a team process. In the best case scenario, it's the entire team working together to say, yeah, this is an issue. I'm noticing this in, maybe in math class, but maybe the English language arts teacher isn't noticing that. So it might vary based on the content that your child is struggling with. It could happen, across the board. So the goal is really, as a team, to acknowledge what issues are there and how do we fix them. Because at the end of the day, that 504 plan is a contract. It is the contract between the school and you, and it lays out the things that they are going to do to provide your child a fair and appropriate public education, right? That level playing field. And so it's really important for everybody to understand what that looks like. And in the guide, we talk about making sure that your child understands what's in their 504 plan, because they need to know, especially if they're little ones, that their teacher might be doing some things with them that they aren't doing with other students, perhaps, but also as they get older, for them to know that they can self-advocate if they feel comfortable talking with teachers, and making sure that they're part of that process of knowing, is my plan being implemented? Am I getting the accommodations that I'm supposed to get so that I can be successful?
You've mentioned the guide, and I want to give Patty a chance now to throw it up on the screen, if you will, that thankfully CCN and Dr. Kerr put together a bit of a guide, a way to navigate through some of this and make it as simple as possible, understanding that it can be, and again, I think you touched on it, an intimidating process. Like anytime you have to go in, listen, I'm terrified if I had to go sit down with the principal, the vice principal of a school, because I still remember what it was like, and it was never a good thing. It's never a good thing for me. So, you know, the idea that it can be a little intimidating,
Yeah.
and we're trying to help make it a little bit better. And so we have the link up right now. And Patty, I'll let you jump in as well, because I know that we have different ways that people can access this. It might be a good way to put it. Unmute yourself, Pat. Okay, so we'll wait for Patty.
Silly, silly. All right, here we go. You know,
so
oh, go ahead.
You can access it through the website, correct?
Yes, Ildi's website is lotustcg.com/resources. And both the wonderful video that she has put together, as well as the resource book, is available to download and to view on that site. You could also email me at patty.luttrell@childrenscancernetwork.org for a copy, an electronic copy, a digital copy. And the third way is we actually have hard copies of these resources as well. So if you want to kind of keep it for your references and have a hard copy, or share it with the school, share it with anyone else, absolutely happy to get you one. Email me your address, I can send it to you, or give me a holler. You can stop by the Resource Center and grab one. So wonderful.
Well,
happy to.
And I would point out to those of you that are watching or have watched this, because some people watch it later, so that you probably know people in your circle who may not even be aware of this, so they're going through something similar and had never heard the term 504 plan come up, and you know, and sharing it with others and helping them, all for the end goal of making it easier for these kids to assimilate or re-assimilate back into the educational environment, and give them the support that, by the way, and I'm going to use to say, they are legally obliged to have, which is part of this. This is not a wish or a whim. This is a requirement, and the schools have to go along with this and make this accommodation, if you will, for your child. Dr. Kerr, is there anything that you want to add? Did I leave anything out? Goodness hopes the answer is no.
I don't think we've left anything out, but I just want to make sure that we reiterate a point that you made earlier, which is, over the course of your child's education career experience, things may change. And so the plan that you create while your child's in treatment can be modified every year, even post-treatment. And so some of the things, you know, for example, when you're actually in treatment, there might be a lot of medical accommodations. So the guide has a whole section on different types of medical accommodations, depending on what's happening, whether that's a fast pass to the nurse, or a change in kind of access to food, nutrition, or, you know, drinks during the day that other kids may not have access to. So again, they may not always need those kind of accommodations when they're, you know, post-treatment and long into survivorship, but they may need new accommodations. So really, if families understand that this living document is designed to meet their child's needs, no matter where they are in treatment, the process is the same year over year over year. So that's the nice thing. The more, you know, experience you get with it, the less intimidating it is. But our goal really, like you said, Bruce, is to give parents, caregivers, support persons access to information so they can advocate on behalf of their child. Because while everybody wants the best for their child, the parent in the room is really the only one who's advocating from that perspective. And it's really important to us that we provide parents with all of the information that they need to do that.
Thank you so much for your time this morning, Dr. Kerr.
Do we have time for questions, Bruce, or are there any questions I didn't notice in the
I didn't
chat?
see any, but we can unmute. And are there any questions out there from anybody watching?
I have one thing I'd love to add and just or kind of emphasize is the one thing that makes this guide really unique, I think, is the samples in there. There's example letters, there's examples of the types of accommodations that you can request. And I know for some families that have used it already, they were just thrilled to have those suggestions because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so it's really a unique resource that way in that it provides you not only with the tools, but samples as well. So it's nicely done, Ildi. Thank you so much for this gift to all of the families.
And Dr. Kerr, one thing that I remember in just in speaking to you is that post-treatment, sometimes things may pop up months, dare I say years later, that weren't an issue at one point, but are still directly linked. And 504 covers that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we hope that you learned something. We hope that you have the resources in front of you now in a variety of different ways so that you can dig into this and again, become the best advocate you possibly can for your cancer warrior as they go through this journey and try to make the school process is already tough enough. You know, we don't need to add more hurdles, right? And this helps kind of knock down some of those barriers. So thanks again, Dr. Kerr. Thank you, Patty, and all the wonderful people at CCN. And thank you for being with us. Again, share this information with your friends. We'll have it up. We have the videos up. We have the links if it's easier for you. And let any of your friends going through this as well, your circle, know that there's this opportunity out there that's specifically for them and for their child and can certainly help them. We'll do another CCN Live soon. Keep watching Facebook and Instagram and all the other social media channels on the next time we all get together. In the meantime, thank you guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.